Hello, Rob. Okay, so just discussing the brief tonicizations. The first one occurs in bar three. You have a 5/4/3 going to a 6. The A is what's being tonicized, and that's established because you have that G sharp on B4 of measure 3. And the second one occurs in bar 6. You have a 5/4/3 going to a 5/6. So that is an F sharp essentially just going up to a G. The next one occurs in bar 7. You have in the key area of 5, you have these 7 diminished 7 going to a 5, 8, 6, 4, 7, 5, 3. This one is the weirdest one of the group because you have the D doesn't really feel tonicized until beat 2 of bar 8 because, or I mean on beat 1 of bar 8 because you have that cadential quality to it. So initially the C sharp does go to the D, but it still feels like a G chord for 2 beats because it's kind of like a 1/6/4. It doesn't really become a strong D7 chord until bar 8. The next occurrence is bar 12. You have a 7 diminished 7 chord going to a 5. That is on beat 2 going to beat 3. And so that is the F sharp going up to the G chord. The G is being tonicized. The 5 is kind of really like there's a suspension going on, so it's like a 5/4 suspended going into 3. In the next one occurs in bar 15. You have a 7 diminished 6/5 going into a 2/6. This one is interesting as well because you have the retardation initially of the C sharp until it resolves up to the D, and the G when it resolves down to the F. So the 2/6 doesn't occur until beat 4. The second to last one occurs in bar 17. You have a 5/7 of 2, and then that resolves to a 2. And this occurs in the sequence portion of the piece. The next one occurs in bar 18. You have a 5/7 going to a 3. In terms of the temporary key areas, you have a 5, the key area of the 5 in bars 7 and 8. We know this because there's the resolution, the perfect authentic cadence in the key of G, and you also have that 7 diminished 7 of 5. So if it weren't in the key of 5, you'd have a 7 diminished 7 of 5 of 5. You have the key area of 4, which starts on beat 4 of bar 9 and sustains through to beat 1 of bar 11. Then you have the key area of 2, which starts on beat 2 of bar 11 going to beat 1 of bar 12. And then you can see the full chord progressions just on my temporary area chart. So then looking at the periods and phrases that I found a 4-bar phrase for beats 1, or measures 1 through 4. The next phrase being measures 5 through 8. I thought it was an antecedent consequent structure. You have they both begin with the do, ti, do, re, mi, which I believe to be a melodic sequence. And then, so I believe bar 4 has a half cadence in it, which leads straight into bar 5, and then there's a perfect authentic cadence in bar 8, which really has a nice 2 4-bar phrases to make a antecedent period structure, A1, A2. And then I believe bars 9 through 16 are one phrase, a sentence structured phrase. The reason why I believe it to be a sentence structure phrase rather than a 2-phrase period, the 2 phrases being 9 to 12, 13 through 16, I think that it works nicely as a sentence because bars 9 through 12, you kind of have this resolution, not a strong resolution, but In the key of F, the key area of the 4, you have the 5-4-3 moving to the 1, the F major chord. And then you have it going directly into another key area in bar 11. And then in bar 12, there's it could be argued that it's a half cadence just because it's ending on a 5. But with the elision going straight into bar 13 and the suspension occurring when the chord is filled out, I mean, it doesn't even resolve down. You have that 4-3 suspension. It doesn't resolve down until beat 4, and by then the soprano and the tenor and the alto have dropped out, the two middle voices. It's just a really strange sounding phrase, especially because this is the first time we've seen really legato playing. As a phrase itself, it just doesn't really work nicely. And then the next 4 bars, you have the reoccurrence of the motif. It's a 4-bar phrase. And in bar 15, you have more legato playing. So if you were to look at them as 2 individual phrases, the first phrase, 9 through 12, would just seem odd because it's in a completely different style. Then 13 through 16 being a phrase, you have bar 15 seeming kind of odd because it's just a legato passage. Whereas if you think of it as one whole, you can really just ignore the strange half cadence thing in measure 12 because it's now one concise thing. It just works together nicely, especially because that bar 15 kind of ties back to the 2 preceding sub parts of the sentence. And then I believe bars 17 through 20 to be a cadential extension. In terms of the harmonic rhythm, you have the chords changing on every beat, and it's interesting because there will occasionally be 2 beats where it stays on the same chord. This occurs usually at a cadence or kind of a transition point. We see it in the first 8 bars, breaking up each 4-bar phrase in half, which is kind of typical of those 4-bar phrases in an antecedent period. And then we see it in measures 9 through 16, where bars 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 are broken in half. By themselves, they don't really work as their own little 2-bar phrases. And since you have measure 12, you can kind of see beats 3 and 4 being their own rest on the 2-beat harmonic rhythm thing. But it's just so weak because you lose the inner voices. The bass goes up an octave. There's just really no body, and then it comes back down into bar 13. It just works nicer if you think of it as a sentence. But you do see primarily the harmonic rhythm changing on every single beat, which creates tension, and then when you have these 2-beat stays on one chord, it kind of gives them more feeling of finality. In terms of the strength of each cadence, I think the strongest cadences are in measure 16 and 20. I think then the second tier of strength would be the perfect authentic cadence in bar 8 because it occurs in the key of 5, in the key of G, so the key area of 5. I think that this makes it weaker because if you're taking the repeat, then it's still a 5-1 motion, whether you have that perfect authentic cadence or not, because you're in the key of G, kind of. It still sounds like you're going 5-1, and even going into bar 9, it still has that 5-1 motion. So it has finality, it has that fa, re, do, and you do have that really nice 8-5-8-6-4 to the 7-5-3, that cadential 6-4 in there, going to a 1, but because it's in the key of G, it just doesn't sound as strong as the other cadences. The weakest cadence is in bar 4, where it's just the half cadence. I believe bars 17 to 20 to be a cadential extension because there's no introduction of new material. It just begins with the sequence, the only sequence in the passage. You have an ascending sequence using secondary dominants to get that kind of circle of fifths motion, except just using secondary dominants to get the same effect. In terms of the texture of the overall piece, you have it's a very staccato piece. It's pretty light playing until bar 9 when it's pretty loud and legato. And then in bar 17 it's interesting because you have every other beat is really weighty. But overall, if it is not pecky, it's being brought out for a reason. The overall texture is pretty staccato. In terms of range, you have a mid to high to low pattern. Bars 1 through 8 pretty much stay in the middle range of the piano. Bars 9 through 12 get into the higher register of the piano. And then bars 17 through 20 are almost an octave below where we started in the beginning. Let's see, the prominent motifs in this, I would say the melodic motif is the do, ti, do, re, mi, fa, re. That's the most important one. Everything else kind of falls in line with that. My expectations at the beginning, it was just pretty much established by that motif, which I think is fulfilled because it reoccurs all throughout the entire piece. Reoccurs in bar 5, it reoccurs in bar 13. It's pretty much always there, so it did meet my expectations. And just in terms to comment more on the overall harmonic motion, really you have, so in bar 1 you have, and for the first phrase you have tonic all the way up to the 4, which is the strong predominant, to the 5. In the second phrase you have a tonic function all the way up until you hit in bar, once you get into the to the key area of 5, that's when you hit that really nice cadential 5, 8, 6, 4, 7, 5, 3, and then you resolve really nicely onto 1, which is the perfect authentic cadence. This, in the grand scheme of things, acts kind of as a dominant to the tonic of C. So whenever you play the end of this, you're in a 5 in the grand scheme of things, which goes nicely into whatever section follows it, which will be in C. Then for the sentence structured part, you don't really get a strong predominant area until bar 15, and then in bar 16 you land right on the cadential 8, 5, 8, 6, 4, 7, 5, 3 to a 1. And then bars 17 and 20, because there's so much 5-1 motion and no introduction of any kind of new melodic material, that's just a cadential extension. The weirdest thing about this piece is that perfect authentic cadence in bars 7 and 8. Because it's in the 5 key area of the 5, you get a perfect authentic cadence, but it feels still like a dominant, which has a really cool way of leading into the succeeding sections, because you get a 5-1 motion even though it's ending on a perfect authentic cadence. The most interesting thing about it is the very smooth stepwise voice leading in bars 9 through 12. He modulates, or doesn't modulate, but goes through those two key areas so smoothly and works in and out of them so well. Yeah, it's great writing. Yeah. Thank you, Rob. It's been great being in your class.